Hi, everyone, and welcome to part 2 of the Leadership and Regulatory Forum. My name is Cindy Triton, and I'm joining you from the traditional territory of the Songhees and Esquimalt Nations in the city of Victoria. Today we have, in one big Zoom meeting, Hi, everyone, and welcome to part 2 of the Leadership and Regulatory Forum. My name is Cindy Triton, and I'm joining you from the traditional territory of the Songhees and Esquimalt Nations in the city of Victoria. Today we have, in one big Zoom meeting, not only outstanding panelists, but patient and community partners, and many professionals who work in a variety of different settings that must collaborate and lead in new ways to modernize clinical trials in BC and Canada. Whether we work in academia, government, the public or private health sectors, without leadership skills, all the subject matter expertise in the world will not enable us to create positive change in the system. Our goal this morning is to both enable learning that resonates with you, irrespective of your role and what you do. We're also hopeful that you'll perhaps have a new perspective about your personal leadership development journey by the end of this session. We've structured today's event to start with a high-level view of health system leadership, with a gradual progression to a tighter focus on clinical research. And we have what I can only describe as an exceptional panel to share their experience, knowledge, and wisdom to inspire us all today to learn and grow as leaders. First, we'll hear from Dr. Graham Dixon, who I like to describe as health system leadership royalty in Canada. Graham is one of the creators of the Leads in a Caring Environment Leadership Framework. Just like new therapies and diagnostics that get approval based on solid and robust evidence from clinical trials, the principles and competencies in the Leads framework have also been informed by solid and robust evidence. Second, Dr. Chinetta Jones, Vice President of Research at the Michael Smith Foundation for Health Research, will share her expansive experience in enabling research capacity building in multiple environments, including at one of the world's largest nonprofits. Chinetta will also share a particularly compelling story of key lessons learned during another viral outbreak. Next, Dr. Shurjeel Chowdhury, the Senior Vice President and Head, Medical and Scientific Affairs at Bayer Healthcare, has been a tireless and always energized leader of both understanding and navigating the challenges to advance clinical trials in Canada. Shurjeel will not only tell us about some of these initiatives, but also where Canada is relative to the international scene and where we need to go. And to wrap up, clinical trials, as we know, are one of the most highly regulated endeavors in our society. And those working in this field need to know and continually develop their regulatory, quality management, and clinical knowledge in lockstep with leadership competencies. Beth Harper is the President of Clinical Performance Partners and the Workforce Innovation Officer at the ACRP. And she'll tell us how this all comes together for clinical research professionals leading the modernization of clinical trials. Following Beth's presentation, we will go live with Q&A, so please post your questions in the chat box. And now, let me introduce Dr. Graham Dixon.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to you this morning about the role of leadership, in particular the Leads in a Caring Environment framework, in terms of modernizing the clinical trials process in British Columbia. I think we all know the power of leadership as it relates to envisaging major change in a system. But what we don't always know, and certainly don't necessarily share together, is an understanding of what good leadership is and what bad leadership is, and how to differentiate between the two. And this is particularly important if we are going to try to lead towards a future where we have modernized clinical trials in British Columbia. The job of leadership is to facilitate change, to whether that change is improvement, a better hospital, a better practice, or a modernized clinical trial system throughout the province of British Columbia. The job of leadership is to facilitate change. And LEADS is a framework that we can all use to assist us with that task. Now, early on in my career, as someone who was fascinated by the practice of leadership, I had read many of the books, I had seen many of the videos, and I still wasn't quite sure what it was. And in fact, an encounter with the academic vice president at Rural Roads was really insightful for me. That he was talking about how fundamentally important it was for the future of Rural Roads to have the right leadership to take it into the future. And then he stopped and he said, "But leadership, what is it?" He says, "To me, it's like fog. You can see it and you can feel it, but you can't grab a hold of it." And then and there, I realized that if you're going to develop leadership, if you're going to know how to utilize it, you need to understand what it is. It needs to have substance and form in order to deal with it in a shared way across the system. And that's what led us to do the work to bring the LEADS framework to life. And that has ultimately resulted in a couple of books that we've written on this particular topic. 3 points that I want to emphasize as it relates to what is at the heart of our thinking around LEADS. First is that we didn't want to replicate leadership as conceptualized in the realm of business and private enterprise. We wanted leadership that was by health for health, that was created with reference to the health leadership literature and through dialogue, discussion, focus groups, etc., with leaders in healthcare itself. Secondly, we wanted this framework to reflect and represent the caring ethos of healthcare itself. We did not believe we should be articulating practices of leadership that didn't show caring for patients, for citizens, for providers, for the people who work to generate the system that our society so desperately needs. And third, we wanted a framework that spoke to the notion of distributed leadership. In other words, change doesn't happen because one heroic leader steps forward and mandates it. It happens because a multiplicity of leaders throughout a system all work together to create the change they need to create. In this case, the modernization of clinical trials in the province of British Columbia. Now, what is LEADS? 5 domains, 4 capabilities per domain. The first domain is LEADS self, which simply says that the leader you are is the person you are. And so you need to be very conscious of your strengths, your limitations, your belief systems, and your biases that you bring to the practice of leadership. You need to be as authentic as possible in leading a change like modernization of clinical trials. Second domain of LEADS, engage others. Leadership doesn't exist without followership, and therefore any good leader has followers. And if people are going to work with you and follow you in the modernization of clinical trials, you must have the skills to engage them. Third domain of LEADS, achieve results. This was a simple recognition that the taxpayer is paying us to steward a system that is expected to lead to health and wellness. And the results must define whether we're good leaders or not. And here are 4 of the capabilities to achieve them. Fourthly, develop coalitions, a domain of LEADS that says change doesn't happen in a system without interorganizational cooperation. And certainly, clinical trials process is going to require cooperation amongst health authorities, universities, Clinical Trials BC itself, and the citizens and patients in BC to make it happen. The 5th domain of LEADS, systems transformation, is about ensuring that the knowledge and information we have about how to create systemic change is practiced by the leaders who are taking responsibility for modernizing clinical trials in BC. So those are the 5 leads domains and 20 capabilities. Another way of looking at leads is as a change model. So if you look at it solely from the perspective of results, the achieved results domain, when we envisage modernization, we envisage a better future than today. So between that better future and the current state is a gap that all of us must lead to close. We need to move the current state to become the future state. And the achieve results domain helps us understand that. Secondly, the other domains help us in that 2 of them are about creating relationships to bridge that gap. Interpersonal and operational relationships, engage others. Interorganizational relationships, develop coalitions. 2 other domains of leads can also help us bridge that gap. The lead self domain and understanding the trials, tribulations you're going to go through leading that change, but also the behaviors you're going to have to adopt. And finally, the change dynamics pertinent to system change. And if we're skilled at all of those 5 domains of leads, we can accomplish the change that we choose to accomplish. Now, I'm very conscious of the fact that context is everything when it comes to the practice of leadership. And you might say to yourself, well, during the COVID crisis time, for example, is lead still relevant? And we think it is. Joanne Liu, Dr. Joanne Liu said the following: the virus has no mercy. It exposes all our weaknesses, both individually and societally. And what she meant was that we're seeing the inadequacies of many of our current processes, like extended care homes, much more clearly during a time of crisis. And I think that's also been the case with clinical trials in British Columbia. So how might leads, even in this context of a crisis, lead us through this? Well, let's just think of the importance of managing self. If we're going to lead this, how resilient are we going to be as we hit setbacks and are taken off the challenge of modernization because of the challenges of COVID? How able are we going to be as leaders to ensure that we maintain the health of the people, the providers in the system who we're going to rely on to make that change? Thirdly, are we going to be able to take the action that's necessary to create the change that is required? Or are we going to fall back on our old practices of studying something to death without taking action? How many years was action forestalled in the extended care world, for example, when it should have been taken? Fourthly, what purposeful coalitions are we going to build to make this happen? And fifthly, what innovations and changes out in the system now and to be found in other jurisdictions might we embed in our modernization process? So we believe that LEADS is a marvelous roadmap for the practice of leadership for modernization of clinical trials in the province of British Columbia. You're going to hear from my colleagues this morning, and they're going to suggest some changes that could be embraced in that process. And at the end of the 3 days, there is a panel on the topic of modernization and moving ahead. Thank you so much for listening to this morning, and please enjoy the rest of the conference. Take care.
On behalf of the Michael Smith Foundation for Health Research, I first want to thank the organizers for hosting these fantastic discussions over the last couple of days on the modernization of clinical trials, and for the opportunity to present a global perspective on the role of leadership in research and capacity building. This year marks the 20-year anniversary of the Michael Smith Foundation for Health Research, British Columbia's health research funding agency. We respectfully acknowledge that we have been guests and visitors on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, including the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. Founded after Nobel laureate Dr. Michael Smith, We build upon 20 years of achievements to support research talent whose research will improve the health of British Columbians, to continue our long-term investments in building health research capacity, and to further the use of research evidence in policy planning and in practice. As a funder of science and health research, we also understand that the solutions to end today's health crisis, as well as to address future health crises, will lie in scientific discovery and resilient health systems. In 2020, the world faced the biggest health crisis in a century. It took a huge toll in human lives and crippled the global economy. Did we have advance warning? Could we have been better prepared? The answer to both questions is yes. Just the year prior, in 2019, the Global Preparedness Monitoring Board, an independent body convened by the World Health Organization and the World Bank Group, published its first report on global preparedness for health emergencies. It declared that the whole world was unprepared for a global pandemic. Could we have learned from past experience? Yes. Outbreaks of the Ebola virus have been documented since the 70s. From 2014 to 2016, the outbreak in 3 West African countries resulted in more than 28,000 cases of Ebola virus disease and more than 11,000 deaths. It was a fast-growing outbreak with deadly consequences that affected not only the afflicted, but anyone that came into contact with them. There was hope in candidate vaccines, but there were significant research and capacity challenges. The safety and efficacy of the vaccines had not yet been tested in humans. Regulatory approvals were not in place to run clinical trials in the midst of a live epidemic. And there lacked research capacity and research infrastructure in the most challenging of settings, including regions of conflict hampered by conditions of war, weakened health systems, and widespread poverty and hunger. Moreover, community healthcare workers were at tremendous personal risk. They faced threats to their life, not only because of exposure to disease, but violence. This health emergency presented a precedent-setting opportunity to study the safety and effectiveness of vaccines during a live public health crisis. Multiple strategies were rapidly and simultaneously deployed worldwide. Funding was released for research in new treatments and vaccines, while ethics and regulatory approvals were expedited to allow clinical trials to run during the epidemic. Lastly, an innovative clinical trial design was tried. The trial involved a randomized cluster or ring vaccination study in which individuals who had contact with Ebola patients during their illness or death were vaccinated. The trial determined that a vaccine was up to 100% effective in preventing Ebola disease. And there were similar responses observed in studies conducted in other regions of Africa and around the world. When Ebola returned to the Democratic Republic of Congo only months later, and outbreaks crossed the borders into neighboring countries, local health systems were better prepared. Today, there is licensed approval for 2 Ebola vaccines. Thanks to a coordinated multilateral effort, more than 250,000 of people have since been protected by Ebola vaccination. Following the Ebola outbreaks, launched in 2017 by the Wellcome and Gates Foundations and the governments of Norway, Germany, and Japan, followed by significant contributions by many country governments, including Canada, the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations, or CEPI, was established to accelerate the development of vaccines against emerging infectious diseases and to enable access to these vaccines for people during outbreaks. At the very start of 2020, CEPI played a key role in the COVID-19 research response by pivoting its vaccine work to accelerate COVID-19 vaccine development. Together with the U.S. National Institute for Health, CEPI co-funded pharmaceutical company Moderna to enter phase 1 trials, just 63 days after the COVID-19 virus was first genetically sequenced. The Ebola outbreaks and COVID-19 pandemic have underscored the importance in investing in preparedness. That is, to invest in systems in advance to prevent, detect, and respond to infectious disease outbreaks. According to the World Health Organization, $1 billion was spent on the epidemic response to control Ebola outbreaks in the Democratic Republic of Congo from 2018 to 2020. In contrast, $18 million was spent in 2019 on epidemic preparedness and stopped an Ebola outbreak in Uganda in months. It is clear that we need a more sustainable strategy to ensure the world is better prepared for threats from emerging infectious diseases in the future. That shifts a global strategy from response to preparedness, and it requires increasing global investments in and prioritization of research, strengthening research capacity, including people and infrastructure, seeking multilateral cooperation and cross-sector partnerships, from governments and international bodies to public funders and pharma to communities, increasing public trust and community engagement, and ensuring the ethical and equitable access to tests and medicines. From the Ebola story, we can take 5 actions for leadership in health. First, effective leaders lead self by exercising reflective learning. There are huge opportunities for leaders in the global north to learn lessons from the leaders in the global south, the west from the east, and the present from the past. Second, trust between people and leadership is absolutely essential. Effective leaders build trust by meaningfully engaging others, including patients, communities, and the public. Third, effective leaders achieve results by taking action in doing the right thing. It's truly remarkable that less than 1 year after the release of the genetic sequence of the COVID-19 virus, the world is rolling out vaccines. This happened in large part because leaders advocated for open science to share results that have a significant and direct impact on human lives. Fourth, the scale of society's biggest challenges require that effective leaders develop coalitions seeking multilateral international cooperation and collaboration. And last, effective leaders must drive system transformation by addressing systems and policies that perpetuate health inequities. I'll close with words by Dr. Peter Singer, Assistant Director General at the World Health Organization. Decision makers are the key to healthy nations and prosperous economies. It's vital that those in power valorize science and show humility, empathy, and solidarity. Leadership requires the courage to tell the truth to the public, even when the news is bad and the truths are hard to accept. Truthful leaders valorize science, evidence, and data, and these factors drive decisions. They acknowledge weakness, admit mistakes, seek help, and share information, not only with their own people, but with others, because this will be good for all. Thank you.
Good morning. I want to thank Allison, Cindy, and Clinical Trials BC for giving me the opportunity to present on this very interesting topic on the initiatives to support the advancement of clinical trials and to be part of this panel. These are my disclaimers. Canada has a very robust research infrastructure. We have excellent researchers, research institutions, and a reputation for doing high quality research. Despite these advantages, it became clear that as clinical trials became globalized, Canada was facing significant competitive pressure. And this led to a number of initiatives to both promote Canada as a place to do clinical trials and to improve the clinical research environment in Canada. I don't have time to really go through all of them, and I do apologize in advance if I've left some off the list that I have created in this presentation. I will cover a couple of really important initiatives though. And this, starting with the Clinical Trials Summit in 2011, which brought together a lot of the stakeholders that were involved in clinical research in Canada to really brainstorm about what needed to be done to ensure that Canada remained competitive. 2011, 2012 were busy years for these initiatives. Provincial research organizations such as the Alberta Clinical Research Consortium, CTO came to be, Transcelerate was created in 2012. And in addition to the Clinical Trial Summit, the Senate report on Canada's clinical trial infrastructure was released in 2012. And this had very similar findings and recommendations as those that came out of the Clinical Trial Summit. Based on these recommendations from the Clinical Trial Summit, the CCTCC, the Canadian Clinical Trials Coordinating Center, was created in 2014. And over the next few years, the CCTCC launched a number of initiatives, such as the Clinical Trials Asset Map, CCTAM, which is based upon a digital asset map that had been created by BC CRIN. The CTO Streamlined Review for REB review was launched in 2015. The N2 Permission to Contact Toolkit in 2016. The CIHR SPORE initiative, the Strategy for Patient-Oriented Research in 2017, as well as the launch of Catalyst. And in that same year, the CCTCC launched the updated version of the Model Clinical Trial Agreement, version 8, which is still available now. The CTO Quick Start program was launched in 2019. Although not an initiative to promote clinical trials, I have listed here the PMPRB draft guidelines because these guidelines have the potential to have a significant impact on clinical trials in Canada once they are fully implemented. In 2020, because of COVID-19, there has been a very significant research investment made to promote both clinical research and basic research in the fight against COVID-19. I should mention that in 2021, this year, the EU regulations governing clinical trials will be implemented, and their centralized portal will go live, which will greatly improve the capabilities for doing clinical research in the EU countries. This year may also see the implementation of the PMPRB guidelines by significantly changing how drug prices are calculated. These have the potential to impact clinical research in Canada. And although there's not enough time to really go through these in detail, I think I wanted to highlight that this could become a significant challenge to us in the future. In addition to the initiatives that I mentioned in Canada, many countries have launched government-based initiative to really promote those countries as a place to do clinical trials. And you can see the websites that are in the portals available for the UK, Australia, Denmark. And there are data to suggest that these have had an impact in enhancing the number of trials being done in these countries. Now, what have all these initiatives achieved? I think if you look at OECD data and look at research spending as a percentage of GDP, Canada lags behind the OECD. The black line you see on the left-hand side is the average of the OECD countries, and on average, research spending has increased in these countries, whereas in Canada, in real terms, that spending has declined. Similarly, the number of researchers in Canada continues to decline, as opposed to the other OECD countries where there is actually an increase. And these are both very concerning trends. The Conference Board of Canada recently published a white paper looking at the potential impact of the PMPRB changes on clinical research in Canada. They looked at, as a baseline, what was happening prior to the release of the PMPRB report. And you can see that if you're looking at the data from Citeline, the number of clinical trials in Canada relative to the number of global clinical trials has actually decreased to a greater extent over this 5-year period. And Canada has also seen a decrease in the proportion of trials being done here as a percentage of global clinical trials. And again, these are both concerning trends. When we look at operational efficiency, and I will share some bare data here from 2 time periods, 2012 to 2014, 2015 to 2019, we have seen significant but modest improvements in study startup times. And you can see that in the first time period, it took about 7.5 months to get a study started for us. And that has now fallen to a little over 5.5 months. This is an important change relative to these other countries, which represent the US and other European countries. However, this is a modest change, and we definitely could do better. Now, the coming of COVID-19 has created some new challenges and opportunities as well. And I wanted to share with you something that Bayer, in collaboration with Population Health Research, did the ACT trial, which was launched to look at repurposing existing therapies for the treatment of COVID-19. And in the dark bars, you see what the time frame it takes to normally start a trial in Canada of this nature, 337 days. This trial we were able to start from study concept to first patient, first visit in only 28 days. I'm not saying that this is possible for every trial, but I think what it shows is what is achievable if we have a very dedicated, passionate team and that is really interested in getting a trial started quickly. And there's lessons we can learn here to really greatly improve the efficiency and startup times of our regular clinical trials as well. The other thing that the COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted is the opportunity to move to decentralized clinical trials. These are just some of the foundational components of decentralized clinical trials, and a number of these were used as part of the ACT trial that I just mentioned, such as e-consent. The pandemic has really accelerated the move to decentralized trials and the move from that traditional or hybrid trial to full decentralized trials. And I think Canada is in an ideal place to take advantage of this trend because we have the infrastructure, the capabilities to really do well for these trials. So in summary, there have been a large number of initiatives in Canada to promote clinical trials, to improve operational efficiency, and these have resulted in modest incremental improvements in our startup times. However, there are still significant ongoing challenges, and these include declining government R&D investment as a percentage of GDP, a continuing decline in industry-funded clinical trial activity in Canada, continuing loss of clinical researchers, not to mention the potential impact of regulations such as those for the PMPRB. We do need more disruptive change, not just incremental improvements. And what the response to COVID-19 highlights is that this change is possible. Funding was made available to do clinical research on short notice in this setting. We were able to initiate trials very quickly. And there's definitely things we can learn from this response to the pandemic. And finally, I think we need to leverage the opportunity for Canada to lead in decentralized clinical trials. Thank you.
Greetings, everyone. I'm really pleased to have this opportunity to share a number of things that ACRP, or the Association of Clinical Research Professionals, is doing to support and advance the clinical research workforce. For those of you who don't know us, we're a nonprofit, mission-focused professional member association with over 13,000 global members. We're based in Washington, D.C., and we're celebrating our 45th year of promoting excellence in clinical research to ensure it's conducted ethically, responsibly, and professionally throughout the world. Our three overarching objectives are to grow and diversify the workforce, to make sure we have a healthy pipeline of future clinical research professionals. We're also focused on enhancing the competency of the existing workforce and supporting the sustainability of the workforce. Like many of us, when we started our careers, we had no idea what clinical research was or all the great opportunities that exist. And we're trying to overcome that with our Find Your Element campaign that we've been piloting this past year. It's a campaign designed to build awareness of clinical research as a career option, and it's focused on high school and college students. And you can learn more by visiting clinicalresearchcareers.org. And the campaign creative messages focuses on these 6 emotional motivators to help the target audience emotionally connect with these elements and to find their element in clinical research. And to date, we've reached over 22 million people who previously didn't know anything about clinical research. Over 150,000 students have visited our website, and 113 students have requested more information and are hopefully on their journey to pursuing a career in clinical research. We have a number of other priorities and initiatives this year. That includes recently developing a diversity advisory council and working on a pilot project with a sister member organization called Black Women in Clinical Research. We've developed a clinical trial apprenticeship program in collaboration with Mass Bioed. And we're pursuing a number of initiatives to help our members grow in their cultural competency, certainly a key competency for any future leader. We are also undertaking a new project to develop guidelines to help organizations create more meaningful and relevant internship opportunities for new clinical research professionals. In terms of enhancing the competency of the existing workforce, we're building upon a lot of the work done by the multi-stakeholder joint task force in clinical research competency. This colorful wheel represents the 8 competency domains that were identified as being necessary for any clinical research professional, and most notably communications and teamwork, leadership and professionalism, those softer skills that are the core essence of what makes a successful clinical research professional and certainly a future leader. So what we've been doing at ACRP is creating a number of competency resources, and this is a busy chart, but it's really just here to represent that we have a number of clinical research professionals that we focus on: principal investigators, clinical research coordinators or study coordinators, clinical research associates or study monitors, and a number of other professionals. And we've been developing a range of competency resources, from hiring guidelines to specific role guidelines, training programs, certification programs, and more. And we've, over the last number of years, accomplished a number of programs. Quite a few are underway, and some are still pending. But all of these resources we make available to the public at no cost outside of our training and certification programs to help enhance the competency of the clinical research workforce. In terms of how this all applies to the LEADS framework that you've all been hearing about, we're really trying to support a number of things, creating opportunities for clinical research professionals to learn and grow through all of our e-learning, Train the Trainer, and other clinical research training programs, as well as our certification programs. And a new leadership subspecialty certification is a key focus for us for 2021. We help our members and those who take our programs develop the critical thinking skills through our simulation training program, something that's really unique to some of our programs compared to traditional learning or e-learning programs. And finally, a lot of our competency guidelines really emphasize these soft skills that are necessary for developing those leadership attributes. We accomplish all of these initiatives through the generous funding and support of our Partners in Workforce Advancement, or PWA, and through the dedicated volunteers that help us develop all of these work products. And certainly you can visit acrpnet.org to learn more about all of these initiatives, or contact me to learn more about how you can get involved. I thank you very much, and I look forward to a very productive Q&A session and discussion with our panel.
All right. Hello, everyone, and thank you to our presenters. Absolutely fantastic stuff there. And we've been chattering around in the background here just about how exciting it is that this learning is being brought to the forefront for everybody. So welcome to the question and answer portion of our event this morning. This part of the session provides us all with opportunities for more rich, diverse, and impactful learning on top of what you just learned from our presenters. So we invite you, please, to participate. What's of interest to you is very often of interest to others. So put those questions out there. Now we're going to try to address as many questions as we can, and about 5 minutes or so left, we will ask our presenters to answer the same question, and I'm going to give them that question. So it'll be a rapid fire style response to wrap up. And before starting, we have 2 polling questions for you. So the polling tab should be on the right side of your screen. So I'll give you just a second to find that. And the first question is, what is the biggest challenge facing the clinical research community in enabling some of the calls to action put forward by our panelists? Interesting, just watching the results come in here. This is great. Great stuff. Okay, thank you, everybody. These look like some of the recurring themes that we've seen come up in other parts of the conference so far. Excellent. Okay. All right, thank you. We will go on now to the second question. What leadership attributes do you think you need to develop to better equip you to lead the changes addressed by the panelists? Okay. Just looking. This is great, watching the results come in here. Very good. Okay, all right, so we've got an idea now. Thank you so much for your participation. And with that, we have now set the stage for our question and answer period. And I am going to turn, I know that there are some questions in here, which unfortunately my screen has lost them for a moment. I cannot see them. So if our technical people can help me here. They were up there. Okay. All right, so while that's being worked out, the questions are not visible to me right now. I'd like to ask Janetta if you would unmute, and if you can see what I cannot see as the moderator right now, and I'll work that out, okay? Thank you.
Sorry, so I think I missed your question, Cindy. Is there a specific question, or do you want me to?
Yeah, I cannot see the questions right now. They have, they were visible too, but now they're not.
Okay, the question that I'm seeing in the live chat, the first question, I hope I can read this, is how is BC connecting with other provinces to try and find national solutions for clinical trials? For example, a national RAB, standard contract language, EMR systems that speak to each other, etc. And I'm wondering who might, from our panel, be able to speak to that. Shujil? Yeah, I see a smile on your face, so I'm imagining you may have some thoughts.
I was thinking someone from BC Clinical Trials is probably best suited to answer that question, but I know that all of the provincial research organizations are connecting and trying to sort of extend initiatives that are working in one province to other provinces. So there are a number of efforts underway to try to harmonize the activities across Canada. Still, a lot of work needs to be done, and I think the REBs are a great example where we do need a process whereby you could have just one REB review a protocol and then be able to roll it out across the country. I know there have been discussions. I don't know how much progress has been made on that front.
Thank you. Maybe I'll just say a quick comment, Sergio. As you were presenting, many things stood out, and one of them was the template for clinical trial contracts. An enormous amount of effort went into that nationally. And what we found is that we do not have widespread uptake, even now, of something that was a huge investment within the system. And that is something that needs to be brought back. It needs to be dusted off. We have seen the impact with the COVID studies of not having this at the most critical time. So I think one of the great calls for action, not only to address the other issues which are so germane addressed by Rosario, but also to get that moving again. The same rationale is here now as was there when it was created. So. Yeah.
No, I completely agree. And our own metrics are, we do use the model clinical trial agreement, and it results in the contracting time being reduced by about 50% when we compare studies that use it versus those that don't. So yeah, it's a hidden gem. I think there's value to it. And it is surprising that more sponsors and institutions are not using it.
Yeah, it really is. So thank you. Next question here, now that I'm back in the saddle with the questions, from Heather Harris. And she says, hello to you, Sergio. Hard to believe that the Clinical Trials Summit was almost 10 years ago. In that time, we've made some improvements to the clinical trials enterprise in Canada, but we have room for improvement. What would be the focus of a 2021 version of the summit, in your opinion?
Well, Heather, it's great to hear from you as well. And I remember the summit very vividly because it was really one of the first times that all the stakeholders had come together. And, when I look at the metrics, and there were a lot of bare metrics I couldn't show, but we have some significant improvement in terms of operational efficiencies in starting clinical trials. But some of the things that were highlighted at the summit have not come to pass, whether it is a better process for national REB review, the addressing the loss of researchers across the country, and then something that I mentioned near the end of my presentation is the fact that there is this tremendous move to decentralized trials, which has been accelerated by the pandemic. So we do need a second summit. And I think what we need to do there is to really leverage all of the advantages we have built up in Canada. And I truly believe we can lead in the setting of decentralized trials. That infrastructure is there. And we just need to sort of come together and harmonize on how across the country we can really leverage that. The example I gave of the ACT trial is a really nice one. From the time that Dr. Salim Yusuf called me to say he had an idea for a trial looking at repurposing some existing drugs to treat COVID, it literally took less than a month for us to get the trial underway and have the first patient enrolled. So it just shows what we can do with e-consent, with remote monitoring, because a big part of that trial is outpatient, and those patients never come in, especially given COVID. We didn't want to expose people unnecessarily to the risk. And yet the trial got started very, very quickly. So we can do it. There's a lot of lessons learned, and I think a lot of things to share. From a government perspective, I think what it has shown is that when the need comes, the government can free up funds and allow this research to proceed. So I think we really need to pressure them to also free up those funds to allow us to build the infrastructure we need, even when there's not a pandemic. So lots to do, but I think I think we can accomplish a lot with the next summit.
Yeah. Great, thank you. The next question is from Shan Satuglu, I hope I pronounced that correctly. If we look at health and related sector human resource capacity building, people go through various stages of career development. I'm wondering how we can advance awareness of clinical trials as a potential pathway for early to mid-career development and diversification for health and other occupations. I'm loving this question. Perhaps through the LEADS framework or models for interprofessional practice and education. People usually enter into careers and with the self-concept of being an individual contributor within a scope of practice. This is an excellent question. Now, who would like to, I'm just gonna, it kind of touches everybody in a way, of our presenters. Does anybody want to step forward for this one?
Cindy, I'll take a stab. Good afternoon, everyone. Really delighted to be here. So building on some of the things I mentioned in my presentation, ACRP has a number of initiatives, this campaign to build awareness of clinical research as a career option, so people are aware of it. And we have a number of resources. We have a Getting Started in Clinical Research landing page that has some introductory training, a beautiful career lattice and ladder that shows all of the different opportunities for clinical research careers, how you can grow up in a more specific role, but grow out working in different roles. So that might be a good place to start, is just broadening awareness for people who have never learned or knew what it was about, and then finding some practical ways that they can go ahead and pursue learning about those different careers. So I think that's just a starting place, but perhaps just letting you all know that we have some of those resources available.
Okay, would anybody else like to comment on that? And invite our presenters, along with everybody there in the audience, think about where you are now and what you're doing and what you had intended to do when you were in university in terms of a career path. And it might resonate with you as to maybe you didn't even know that clinical trials existed at that time.
So Cindy, I can provide some thoughts on that particular question. And hi, Shan, I know Shan. In some of the professions that the physician profession, the nursing profession that we work with nationally around leadership and leadership development, they're struggling with the same challenge, which is you start out in a very professional place, if you like. But as you progress through your career, other opportunities emerge for you and other potential career pathways emerge. Mm-hmm. And we're certainly having discussions in terms of where leadership fits in that context, because at the end of the day, a doctor may wish to move into a very formal leadership role, or a nurse may wish to. And they would like to see the progression of lifelong learning that would help them get there. Mm-hmm. And I think that is an approach, and that's what I hear Beth actually talking about doing. But I don't know that we have the infrastructure in the human resources dimensions of our province to facilitate that kind of pathway articulation, if you like. But if someone knows of it, then I would love to know about it.
Cindy, if I can add to what Graham just said, and this is really my experience when I started off in clinical research. Infrastructure is really important, and if it had not been for the Canadian HIV Trials Network freeing up some resources to let me get started with my first trial, I don't think I would have gotten into research, because that initial investment was just not possible without that support. I think the other thing is really important is mentorship. You need some good senior mentors who can guide you. It's not easy to go from doing your first trial and learning the ropes. Is so important to have someone who has done it before and can guide you. And I think that's where I do worry that we're losing some of these senior researchers and mentors. And we just need to make sure that we create enough researchers that can guide the future Canadian researchers who want to get into this space.
Thanks. And Sonia, just a couple of thoughts what really kind of resonates with me in terms of the question is the kind of early career talent development in this, and also extending research training and opportunities to other health professionals, which I think is fantastic. As a funder of research that cares about the use of research evidence in policy and practice, I think it's so critical that this is part of the development and learning of clinical research careers very early in their development path. So we have various different awards and programs available through Michael Smith, Health Professional Investigators, and Scholar Awards. But the really key point to this is that the time has to be protected for these individuals to be able to develop those skills, develop the opportunity to protect time for research, but also to value leadership and what that means in health or clinical research. So, I think an important element of that is very much piggyback on what others have said, is making sure that that's part of the curriculum for early career professionals so they can carry that on through the rest of their career.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, excellent. Thank you. Thanks so much, everybody. It looks like we've got another area of capacity building to tackle here at Clinical Trials BC. Next question is from Colleen Adderley. While we're trying to forge ahead provincially to increase both recognition and understanding of clinical research from an organizational leadership perspective, as well as community perspective, that said, there continues to be inequity in the West Coast being selected by large pharma companies to conduct their trials. How do you envision that this inequity can be reduced? Is there a way that we can work together provincially to not only increase awareness, but have the health authorities partner so that studies can be supported by multiple sites collectively? So this is another great question. And I'm just wondering, Sharjeel, given that we're talking about pharma, would you like to start with an answer to this one?
Well, I think I would agree. I think the more sites we can have participate, the better. One of the things I think we found really valuable, and in Ontario we have the CTO Quick Start program, which allows you to really quickly get a study up and go and started in terms of RED approval, contracts, and so on. We use that for the ACT trial as an example. I think Canada does have a tremendous research capacity across. So we often talk about the fact that we don't have enough people relative to other countries. But when I look at our own metrics in terms of how well Canada does in terms of clinical trial enrollment, we're often in the top 5 in some of the BEAR trials. So we have the sites. Anything we can do to facilitate getting a lot of sites started quickly will help us in terms of our competitiveness versus the rest of the world. And I mentioned the European regulations. This is what Europe is doing for all of the EU. They're making it easy to be able to start the trial and quickly recruit sites, not just in one country, but all member states of the EU. That is something we need to do for the Canadian provinces. And I think if we have a good process for doing that, it'll make us very competitive.
Agree. And I'll just ask quickly if any of our other panelists would like to address this one as well. I do have a little opinion to add to this as well. Okay, I think, Colleen, this is great. And I think that what we are seeing now as a result of COVID more than ever is the connections strengthened between the health authorities so that we can start to address how do we coordinate, how do we share, and how do we avoid recreating wheels on our own across our regions. So I think this is a good one that we can bring forward internally as well. So thank you.
Yeah, Cindy, if I can add just one point, and then that's been a lesson as well. I think Canada has a lot of researchers, but we all sometimes don't collaborate. So there have been a lot of COVID studies started, very few that were finished, because everybody wanted to do their own rather than come together and do one. And I think that's an area where perhaps better collaboration is needed. So we leverage all of the strengths we have and not fragment our efforts.
Yes.
So
absolutely.
Cindy, maybe I can comment because I was intrigued by Wendy's previous presentation in the previous session. Where she talked about partnerships, and as you know, developed coalitions is an element of the LEADS framework. And one of the biggest challenges in a coalition, which is a partnership or an interorganizational collaboration, is figuring out what it can do to benefit the group, as opposed to what is best left to the group to do on its own.
Mhm.
And if indeed there is a value in building a process to support private industry, if you like, getting access in a more broader way to the health authorities, then maybe that's a centralized process that Clinical Trials BC could propose. But that has to be in dialogue with the health authorities and with the private enterprise companies themselves. And it should be based on the principle that you only centralize what's the ultimate benefit to the group that you're trying to serve.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Graham, for that context. Very important. Next question from Tracy Wong, and this is for Beth. Does the ACRP have a tool that will take research professionals through different professional development pathways? So Tracy's up to the ACRP clinical research professional, but she's having difficulties understanding the next step for training, development, and designation.
Sure. Thanks for the question, Tracy. And broadly, I would say yes. So that busy slide I showed, we have developed a lot of role-based competency guidelines that really show what are the expectations for an entry-level, intermediate, and senior coordinator, clinical research associate, and so forth. So those are built upon the Joint Task Force competency framework, but we've translated them to be very, very granular and specific to these particular roles. So I think one of the best opportunities, all these are available for free on our website. You don't have to be a member, but to look ahead, what is expected of me in the role that I want to pursue. What are your overlapping competencies? Many of them are transferable, even if you haven't worked in that particular job. And then look at where the potential opportunities are and what you might need to work on to advance to that different role. But really showcasing the overlapping competencies, I think, is a great place to start. And I'll be happy to speak with anyone further about all these resources and how you can put them into practice.
Great. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Beth. All right. From Heather Harris, I'm re-asking the question I asked you in an earlier panel. The research enterprise has been very much in the news these days due to the rapid development and approval of the COVID-19 vaccines. And it's the results of the research enterprise that shall set us free. Yes. How do we leverage this to create more support for the research enterprise as a whole and for increased participation in research? Fantastic question. Who would like to start with this one from our panel?
Cindy, I think it links and kind of really validates some of the things that I said in my own talk, which is really about focusing on preparedness. You know, the investments, I think government still need to prioritize investments in research capacity, in R&D, et cetera, and not just wait till there's a health emergency. So I think this is very much that. I think we just have to continue to communicate that and make that and advocate for that to those in leadership. But I think there's another element of that real advocacy can really come from the communities and the public. We know that misinformation is really, really, really harming, I think, a lot of the potential to really help the most people. And so I think, again, even after an emergency, we have to continue to persist in communicating and sharing our findings and being honest and truthful about what we know and what we don't know with our communities, with our public, and let them also be the voice to leaders in government, to make sure that there's that support. We would not be in the position we are today in order to be able to respond, not just globally, but also in BC, if we didn't already have that investment in the research and capacity that existed prior to this health emergency. And let's be honest, we know we're going to see another emergency in the near future. So let's not be unprepared.
Absolutely. Anybody else from the panel? Graham?
Well, I'd just like to hearken back to the words of Mary Ackenhausen in the earlier session, where she said we have to have some really bold, ambitious goals that we establish for ourselves. When I say ourselves, I guess I'm thinking in the context of the modernization goal for clinical trials BC that sets ambitious targets and that articulates, in the context of that, the value of what clinical trials BC contributes to the BC health system. And I think that is a collective task that not just clinical trials BC itself faces, but establishing that clear driving endpoint that everybody can see we're working towards and that validates everything that we're trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's very important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Graham. I'm also thinking back just quickly, Sergio, you showed a slide that showed the startup time for the COVID trials versus the usual trials. And it's like, we can do it. Well, we did that in part because all of the other trials were shut down and our resources were laser focused on COVID. So if we think of our poll results and some of the feedback that came back to us around infrastructure and funding, so our capacity when focused in one area, yes, we can do it, but we also have to look at when we bring back, and we have brought back, all the rest of the research and how we move into the future, not only be structured and resourced in the way that we need to, but be efficient in our processes in new ways too. So.
Yeah, Cindy, I agree, but I think it also does highlight how quickly you can get trials started in Canada. I think to the vaccines question, what this has highlighted is where the Canadian gaps are. I mean, we are struggling to get doses of vaccine in because the capacity we used to have to develop and manufacture vaccines has been lost. And so I think that, again, coming back to what has already been said during the panel multiple times, that need for that infrastructure for doing clinical trials, for manufacturing, that investment needs to be there, and it needs to be made not when we're in the middle of a pandemic, but in preparation for the next one. And I think there's a lot of lessons here, but also things that we can use to potentially leverage funding and support from government, because I think they do have this awareness that we were caught a bit flat-footed this time, and we want to be better prepared than when the next coronavirus comes.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I'm just watching the time here. We have a question from Dee, and I'll get to it quickly. I'm going to ask, because we do want to have time for the last rapid fire wrap-up questions, that we have a quick answer to this one, and it's a great question. Could the panel comment on how having research included in leadership explicitly in the job descriptions may support capacity, please? So this is putting research accountabilities into the job descriptions putting research accountabilities into the job descriptions of senior leaders making decisions in the health system.
Cindy, I'll chime in just because I'm a huge advocate for competency-based job descriptions and competency-based resumes or CVs. And if we really take a look at typical job descriptions, they outline 1,001 roles and responsibilities, but they don't get down to that articulation of really what the competency expectation is. So I think the answer is probably a yes, and others are more expert than me, but I think building out those clear competency expectations in the job descriptions would go a long way for this and other roles.
Okay, thank you. All right, we're now going to move to the final question for each of our presenters. And this again has about a 1-minute time frame. The rapid fire question, there goes my alarm. What is the key takeaway message for our learners today to put into immediate action? So we're going to go alphabetically from Beth to Janetta to Graham and then to Sergio. Beth.
Great, thank you, Cindy. I'm going to pick on one of the words from the LEADS framework, which is action. If we think about it, Developing our leadership competencies don't happen by spontaneous combustion. We have to be intentional and have an action plan. So I would be an advocate for doing an assessment of your leadership competencies. What does your current portfolio look like? What are your gaps? Pick one gap and then be very intentional about an action plan. If it's something that's a knowledge gap, how are you going to go about gaining that knowledge? What courses? Who do you need to interact with? If it's more of a skills and abilities, you know the knowledge, but you need to translate it into practice. Talk to your manager about getting exposed to different experiences where you can really develop and practice those competencies. So an action plan would be my key takeaway.
Yeah, thank you, Cindy. So for me, it's really about inclusion. And I think that would be the key takeaway for me. Leadership is not just about leading the majority, but protecting the marginalized and the underserved. And, you know, really giving a voice to those that are not being seen or heard. This manifests in different ways in clinical research, from the people who conduct research, the people who participate in health research, the people who benefit from, you know, clinical health research. There's been great discussions at the conference on the importance of increasing representation of different groups in clinical trials, older adults, Indigenous peoples. Would have liked to have seen more about racialized groups. Leaders need to make meaningful commitments to inclusion and back them up with meaningful action, and take responsibility for challenging systems and policies that perpetuate inequities within health research and the health system. And we're clear case of that happening in COVID right now. And lastly, really engaging people and communities in ways that are meaningful to them. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Janetta. All right, Graham.
Well, I think two dimensions of the LEADS framework sort of leap out at me from what I've heard in the conference, Cindy, and I would encourage people to spend a little time in the developed coalitions and systems transformation domains, because they stand for and articulate that there are very deliberate practices that people can use to build effective coalitions, partnerships, that they're very hard to do. They're very hard to sustain, and they need to be very deliberately developed. And yet that's clearly an expectation that permeates the going forward work. Similarly, we've heard a lot about learning health systems and systems, understanding systems dynamics and how to influence systems, whole systems like provincial systems or national systems, I think brings a whole other set of abilities, capabilities, and practices that need to be employed to create change.
Thank you. Excellent. Thank you. Sergio, your rapid, we're down here on the clock, so your rapid response, please.
I think having a really ambitious vision is important. If we set modest goals, we'll get modest results. I think if we set really ambitious goals, even if we don't get all of those achieved, we will still be further ahead. So we really need to lay out a very ambitious vision for where we want to be in clinical trials.
Absolutely. It's absolutely great way to wrap up these answers here for this part. So thank you. So we're going to close now with a sincere appreciation to our presenters who have shared their experience, knowledge, and wisdom to inspire and motivate us today. So thank you so much, Sergio, Graham, Janetta, and Beth. And sincere gratitude as well to Clinical Trials BC and to all of you here today for joining us, for being present, and for your participation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Cindy, a great job of moderating.
Oh,
yes,
thanks.
very well done.
Yes, thank you, Cindy.
Thanks, everyone. Okay.